Today is Victory in Europe Day.
Just as I have a dream.
A salute from Mr. Nelson Mandela.
And Mrs. Thatcher.
Hello and welcome to Systems Reimagined. Today I'm joined by Samuel and Rachel, as always, and we're going to unpack some of the biggest news stories of this past week. We got a little bit busy and sidetracked because of the interview we released on the weekend, but you know, we're all good. We're all good. We'll cover it today. So we're going to start off with PMQs, then discuss universal credit, trade deals with genocidal regimes, Cineworld and Unilever's disastrous policies, I guess you could call it. Russia reports, Twitter's new birdwatch scheme situation. Give an update on the Ugandan election following the coverage we did previously. And finally, some of the probably the biggest news of the week is the inauguration and some of Biden's first orders. So with that being said, I believe it's Rachel who's going to kick us off with some PMQ's analysis.
Yes, so we saw a virtual appearance from Keir Starmer today at PMQs. He was quick to highlight the stark statistic that the UK reached yesterday of 100,000 deaths. And he said that the question on everyone's lips this morning is why? Why do we have the highest death toll in Europe? So Johnson was quick to avoid the question in many aspects and highlight the things that the government are succeeding on at the moment, for example, the vaccination programme. But he really failed to answer this key question of why. And I think Starmer has done quite well there in picking up on the specific kind of feeling in the nation. A lot of people that aren't maybe necessarily super involved with politics or the course of the pandemic, or, you know, the latest like SAGE reports, they're very confused as to why and as to how this number has been reached. This also led on to Boris Johnson saying that there were no straight answers, that there was nothing, no kind of quick fix solution that could be in store. But Starmer again came back and highlighted how waiting and watching certainly doesn't work, and that seems to be the policy that Johnson has been adopting.
Yeah, sorry, just real quick. I'll also say with Boris Johnson when he did when he issued a statement saying he did like whatever he did the best he could with, or they did the best they could with the death toll, which like, you know, obviously if you've been paying a little bit of attention, you would know like there's certain things which he definitely could have done. I think, Rachel, you mentioned it a couple of episodes back when you said that if we locked down 1 week earlier, we could have saved, 20,000 lives or 10,000 lives? I forgot how much it was, but, you know, regardless, you know, the reality is we didn't have to reach this point, and him saying that I feel like is quite disingenuous. But yeah, sorry to interrupt there.
No, I agree completely. That is the thing, this kind of dither and delay that we've seen from the government. It has cost so many thousands of lives. And going on from this, Johnson again kind of trying to get back on his footing and highlighted how the vaccination programme has now seen 6.9 million people vaccinated, which is obviously an incredibly good number and something that's very much needed. But he was quite cautious in highlighting that February 15th kind of date that they've got in mind as to when all of the most clinically vulnerable will have been vaccinated by. He was cautious to say that target could only be met if the supplies were there. We've seen quite a few issues with the kind of supply chains of receiving those vaccinations. He also went on to highlight other so-called positives in the response, but Starmer, as the clip will highlight.
Mr. Speaker, throughout this pandemic, it's been the habit of the opposition first to support one
approach and then to attack it and to twist and to turn. It was only recently that the shadow transport secretary was saying that quarantine measures should be relaxed, Mr. Speaker. We have one of the toughest regimes in the world. We ask people to test 72 hours before they fly. They have to produce a passenger locator form, or otherwise they're kicked off the flight. They already have to quarantine for 10 days. And my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, will be setting out later today, if you care to wait for that, even tougher measures for those red list countries where we are particularly concerned about new variants. And again, I think what the people of this country want for us now to do is to come together as a government, as a parliament, and to get this thing done.
Was keen again to talk about the international arrival situation. Now, Priti Patel, the Home Secretary, has been keen to highlight how the borders are far too open. Ironically, the Conservative government have always been quite keen to close the borders to refugees and immigrants from Europe, but on this issue, they're really keeping them open for international travel. Now, the travel industry has been saying since March that the introduction of quarantine hotels is only a good idea, that it's something that needs to happen. And if we look, as we have in the past, to New Zealand and Australia and other countries that have had a much better track record in handling the epidemic, they have had similar quarantine hotels from the beginning. So it's in no way a novel idea, but it's something, again, that the UK have been very slow to even kind of consider, never mind put plans into achieving, as we are now seeing. Johnson said that the negative PCR test that travellers need to submit 72 hours before arrival, along with a passenger locator form, was adequate enough. I'm not sure if these comments will come back to bite him more than they already have done, as we do probably see quarantine hotels coming in more and more. He has also highlighted, this was just following PMQs, how schools won't reopen until March. This is, again, in a climate where children's education is suffering most. Starmer again highlights today how, kind of broadband inequality and poverty is a key detrimental impact on children's learning. And I'm sure that kind of broadband policy, or certainly speak of, is something we'll get onto in a little while. But it's obviously not good news for parents or for children, really, that March milestone. And that, again, is dependent on supplies and vaccination targets being met. The final thing on PMQs, as I'm sure the clip will highlight,
Mr. Speaker, that made those vaccines possible. And he actually attacked the vaccine task force. I know you want me to sit down, Mr. Speaker. I don't want to make this point because I tried to make it last week and you saw me. He even attacked the vaccine task force for spending £675,000 on an effort to discover whether hard-to-reach groups would take a vaccine. And I really cannot think of a better investment right now of public funds. And I hope that later on this afternoon, the right honourable gentleman may think of apologising for what he did and for that attack on the vaccine task force. Mr. Speaker, they can go on, and the right honourable gentleman can go on making his party political points. We will go on, with or without his help, in taking this country forward, fighting the pandemic and getting coronavirus down.
Was the £675,000 spent on the vaccination task force to reach those kind of furthest away families, which I think is Johnson nicely saying those that have been deprived and economically disadvantaged for many years, and the research around whether they would be willing to take the vaccine. Now, obviously, that's not a huge sum of money in the grand scheme of things, but he was keen to highlight how Starmer was against that. There wasn't too much context, whether Starmer was just kind of highlighting other more beneficial ways to spend that money, or if it was something that he was really, really against, although I don't particularly see a reason why he would have been. So overall, it was an interesting PMQs, but I do think it will be overshadowed by the statement that Johnson delivered to the Commons directly after with that school opening date.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot to unpack in that PMQs, and I found it really interesting in general, especially the more broadband comments surrounding it. Keir Starmer obviously highlighted that 1/3 of families didn't have I'm pretty sure he said adequate supplies to have at home schooling, etc. And so, but as I said previously, I feel like Keir Starmer, when he's saying these things, he's not providing a robust, groundbreaking plan, or really coming out in any really substantive, strong way, providing an alternative to Boris Johnson. And so, this idea that you can just be like, oh, these families, they don't have enough technology, and you just acknowledge the problem, but then you're not really coming out strong for it, I feel like is really frustrating, first of all, because he's identifying all the the right areas, but then he's just not being he's not having a great finishing kind of section on that. He's not really providing anything concrete, which is really frustrating. So I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
Yeah, I mean, not much else to add, but I really agree with Rachel. I think the why really speaks to people across the spectrum within the UK, even people who are not exactly political and follow that politics really closely. I think looking at the news every night, you can see the UK is consistently ranked at the top in how badly they've handled it. And I think a lot of people are just wondering the why. Why has it come to this? And I think Starmer did pretty well to emphasize that why. But as you said, Benji, I think it is a big issue for Starmer that he hasn't come through with any concrete policies and alternatives to address this crisis, And so it makes it pretty easy for Boris to say, what would you do? You haven't come up with anything. So I think that's a real challenge for Starmer, and trying to come up with an alternative to how he dealt with it. And I think there are plenty of examples out there to show how successful policy can be. But yeah, as you said, for example, with the broadband, someone like Corbyn, who a lot of people don't like, he had an alternative before the coronavirus even was a thing, and now people are looking at that idea and they're considering that as a possibility. He was once considered, they called it broadband communism, but now now they're considering that policy. So that definitely speaks to Starmer's lack of policy ideas. And even when important things like schooling and stuff like that, I think he definitely needs to come up with something to counter what Boris is doing, because that'll make it even more effective, his criticism, if he offers an alternative. Because if he doesn't have much, then it's easier for Boris to deflect on the criticisms, So
also, yeah. I will say, in terms of the why as well, just building onto that, I feel like Keir Starmer could have been more aggressive in his approach. I think he could have. I mean, I feel like doing a comparison or something to a different country could have been valuable probably over there. Especially when it came with regards to the discussion about the COVID hotels, why haven't we doing this since day one? Why haven't we doing it? These things, you can just really compare it to other countries and really make them look bad. Boris Johnson in this case. And so, I think that's probably one thing I'd like to emphasize there, that he could have done better. And also, I will say, Rachel, you mentioned schooling as well, which is also a really big deal right now. And the idea that I feel like Starmer he doesn't have a huge leg to stand on over here, right? He came out just as late as Boris Johnson with regards to closing schools and stuff like that. Didn't want to come out in support of the NEU, and so if Boris Johnson has a lot of ammunition there to criticize him, but Boris Johnson is, however, still in denial of the idea that schools are unsafe, as was discussed in PMQs, which is kind of ironic because. Well, I don't know. I don't know if we should get into this whole thing, but if schools were really that safe, why are they closed right now? Anyway, I'll pass it back to you, Rachel, if you have anything to add there.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a slippery slope to get back down the debate around whether schools are safe or not. But ultimately it speaks volumes that they're not open at the moment. He was quick to critique Starmer for saying that he was in favour of schools reopening as soon as kind of possible in terms of safety. but that's quite a legitimate position for him to hold. So yeah, I think I just echo what you both said in regard to PMQs there.
I also have one more thing to add, like this idea of Keir Starmer having U-turns or being like a flip-floppy, just being like a flip-floppy guy with regards to policy, also really annoys me, because I mean, like, one of the biggest headlines of 2020 was how many U-turns the Conservative government did. Like, I just like not the audacity, because like I don't like Keir Starmer either that much, right? But like, you're just a bit delusional if you say that he's more inconsistent than the own government who's had multiple U-turns with like on things which like as basic as, you know, free school meals, which also, sorry, we'll get to universal credit in a moment, but free school meals, I believe, is being continued through the half term or something along those lines. I'm pretty sure I saw it today. So that's also a positive headline.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think just kind of quickly coming back on that, I'm by no means a huge Starmer fan. And it is a very difficult line to kind of balance between critiquing the government, but also not just jumping on every policy that they have and kind of offering a negative withdrawal. But that does definitely result in sometimes him being seen as this kind of like indecisive, flip-flopping, sit on the fence kind of guy. So it's certainly a difficult balance, and whether he strikes it correctly, I'm not too sure. But there's certainly time to perfect that before another election.
Yeah.
I think moving on to universal credit then, this has been a huge story in the news this last week, and it comes from the £20 bump in universal credit, the uplift, which was introduced at the beginning of the pandemic, and it's set to be extended while COVID restrictions last and then phased out and given just to those most in need. So this is somewhat of a U-turn, because there was quite a united front on the fact that this wouldn't be extended past the point that we're at now. But there was some initial backlash, and this has been increased recently, and it is now looking like it may well be extended. Certainly, just kind of the most recent media reports today, it is looking quite probable. This is also probably due to the cabinet split, although insiders are keen not to kind of overemphasise what's going on. The £1,040 extra per year, Sunak was hesitant. He said that it would be a £6 million uplift, which is permanent, which obviously is a drop in the ocean in the grand scheme of things. But he was kind of highlighting how this could actually lead to like a penny on income tax, and talking about fuel duty, even though things don't directly correlate.
Yeah.
Also, Theresa Coffey, who is the Work and Pension Secretary, has been quite vocal, to give her credit, in highlighting the fact that this is not just a safety net for those most in need. This is an absolute lifeline and needs to be a permanent fixture, not just kind of like a symptom of the pandemic. It should be the bare minimum anyway, and there should be extra on top of this within the pandemic, but obviously that's not the case, so this is very needed. A government source tonight has come out and said that it's not a binary choice between extending or not. All options remain on the table, and ministers are working through them to find the best solution for families on lower incomes. Again, just kind of trying to smooth this, what is quite obviously a bit of a rift within cabinet.
Yeah, I think even like in like the most harshest economic climate, you know, I think Rishi Sunak cannot help but to stick to his conservative ideals of austerity and just like trying to fight back the most minimal increase in universal credit to help the most vulnerable people in the worst economic crisis. It's like, I just like that. I don't understand why they're so reluctant, especially for something of a sum. Did you say 6 million extra a year? It's like, as you said, in the grand scheme of things, it's not much difference, you know. And these are hard times, you know. So it just as with, you know, the free school meals, I just don't understand, like, you know, their reluctance. And I mean, not much else to say about that. I can just imagine like Rishi Sunak like deciding, like, you know, in this worst crisis to like put people on furlough. He probably was like freaking out that he had to actually help people. But yeah, it's obvious, I think we should have learned from the 2008 financial crisis that of the damaging effects that austerity has on the population, especially working class people. And I think in a crisis like now, where you really have to, once it's done, to power up the economy and give money to the population to spend, and to grow the economy. Like, I don't understand how austerity would help, and I think even the most mainstream economists who are centrist, mainstream economists, I think they would agree that it's important that consumers have a bit more spending power to uplift, the economy once this is all said and done. So I don't understand the reluctance. I think it could be maybe just an ideological one that kind of like pushing him, preventing him from letting this be. But yeah, I just think it doesn't make sense, just even economically speaking, to impose more austerity or to prevent, more increased spending. So yeah.
Also, how much did Eat Out to Help Out cost? How many million was that? Like, what? Man, Eat Out to Help Out cost way more than this, and it led to like 1 in 6 people in the second wave. 1 in 6 people who got COVID in the second wave was as a consequence of Eat Out to Help Out. Like, what is this guy talking about? Obviously, every financial decision you make, you should take it with care and benefits, and like weigh up the benefits and the negatives. But like, it's like, this is almost kind of a survival thing at this point. Like, people really need this. People are really struggling right now. So personally, just don't think it's really wise considering the cost is so minimal compared to what has been, dished out, or dished out is the wrong word, but support given, throughout the pandemic.
I just wanted to quickly add something, because also, since the second lockdown, the furlough scheme has been significantly weakened compared to the initial one, so yeah, it doesn't make sense. But yeah, if you have anything else to say, Rachel.
No, I agree mainly. I think not only is it this kind of ideological standpoint that he has, but also there's some pressure from the backbenchers now too, in terms of the amount that the Treasury are putting out. Obviously, you can easily come back at that and say, of course it's going to be having a huge output. At the moment, we're in a pandemic. There's no economy in the world that is balancing the books while trying to maintain some kind of economic support for its citizens, but especially these growing concerns in the backbenches that we really have been throwing money at things. I think some of the things you could say we've thrown money at are maybe the wrong things. If we look again at the Eat Out Help Out scheme and the really detrimental impacts that had, but I think it's a pretty toxic combination of ideological stance and kind of inside discontent.
Yeah, I really think countries have never really balanced the books, no matter how they try to spin it. But countries have never really done that, and if they have attempted to do that, it's resulting to a lot of damaging effects for the country and society. Because at the end of the day, people are going to say the economy is like a household, but it functions completely different, to a household. So it's not necessarily about balancing the books. Obviously, you cannot be reckless with your spending sometimes, but it's not the equivalent, and it's particularly in this situation, it's a case where it's necessary to spend more, So yeah, that's all I have to say really about it.
Yeah, I got nothing else to add. But anyway, shall we move on to the kind of trade deals with countries that commit genocide? What a great headline to start off with. But yeah, basically, the government essentially defeated a move which required it to reconsider any trade deal that it does with a country found by the High Court to commit genocide. The measure was defeated 319 to 308. We shouldn't be doing trade deals with countries that do genocide, I don't think. I feel like the UK, no one should really be supporting genocide, right? And and so I feel like not doing trade deals with countries, if it's a global effort, then I think that it would make sense just to kind of countries I think back. Genocide is not the right word for apartheid South Africa, I feel like, but but there you had, in order to get the South African government to kind of change its ways, you had to have coordinated economic action against it, and I feel like it was, I mean, it's also, that's also a very difficult conversation to have because, well, in the South African case, like the idea of sanctions obviously did harm the population, but it did end up forcing a change for the better. And so I think this is, I mean, the way I'm kind of framing this, like, obviously I don't agree with this, but I'm saying we need to discuss it more in the context of, like, how do we deal with countries which are doing all these horrible things, like Saudi Arabia, for example, is doing a genocide, like, in Yemen, right? So how do we deal with, them doing that? And I feel like there's been a lack of coordinated economic response to stop these horrendous acts happening. I just like, so in order for, like, that to stop, essentially. So that's just kind of how I want to frame this. I mean, I'll get your thoughts on it now, but yeah, I mean, just in general, it just sucks. It, like, really sucks because, and obviously in some way this is empowering these nations, but I mean, I guess yeah, it is a hard situation to balance, I guess.
Yeah, I think I'm obviously not surprised by this whole news because, the UK and the US have been doing business with genocidal countries for decades now, But how we define genocidal and how we take action based on these regimes, is this based on, our allies and, business partners? Because, as Benji said, you can look at, like, Saudi Arabia, for example, who's involved in Yemen, who, are very, it's the biggest humanitarian crisis in the world, arguably. Probably it is. And, not a hardly any condemnation about this, because, we have business with them. They provide oil for us. We provide them weapons to implement harm on Yemen. So it's all based on your allies and your partners it's just a geopolitical strategy how you deal with genocide, which is a shame, But ultimately, that means I'm not very surprised by this, this whole letting it slide when it comes to countries committing genocide. So yeah, I mean, yeah, not much else to say about that, except that I'm not really surprised.
Yeah, I think I would agree. Obviously, it's abhorrent to be supporting these regimes, and it is something that we've seen kind of consistently throughout the history of the Conservative Party, especially under Thatcher with those apartheid things.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah, and she was just so reserved in becoming involved, even with other Commonwealth nations. But I think the only thing I would say is I'm reminded of a Theresa May interview, and although by no means you can say that she was good internationally in terms of the kind of drone bombings and things in Syria under her regime, she did say when she addressed the kind of Saudi arms deals that were being proposed by her administration, that the best way to actually effectively kind of get these regimes to change their behaviour is on a level of friendship. They won't particularly, or certainly of kind of mutual assistance and benefit, because they're so unlikely to listen to a country purely throwing sticks and stones and kind of saying that what they're doing is abhorrent. So she argued that some kind of relationship was needed in order to get close, in order to kind of have some like political leverage or economic leverage with them, and then critique the regimes. But I think what this administration is forgetting to do is that second part of the deal, is this critiquing. They've got the first part that May was kind of proposing of the deal, but they're not then critiquing it. They're not doing their job. She kind of put forward this case of like, oh, the only reason we would have arms deals with them is so we can be in a more advantageous position than a country that takes the moral high ground. We're closer to them and then can critique them. But whether this is true or not, like, it's certainly not being conducted at the moment. So I thought that was quite interesting. And just super briefly, I think in terms of international leadership, it's interesting, whatever your opinion on the US and kind of US exceptionalism and things like that is, it's undoubtable that the past 4 years under Trump, they have taken more of a backseat in terms of leading on policies like this. So you wonder with Biden whether he will have that more internationalist outlook and whether there will be perhaps more treaties as to how to avoid dealing with genocidal regimes. I mean, obviously his track record doesn't really suggest that it will.
Voting record
but
especially, I mean, kind of horrendous.
exactly. But I think for the sake of show and signing these treaties, there may be some on the surface kind of things, but whether they're actioned or not.
Yeah, I mean, for me, like personally, I'm sure you probably feel some way. Like I don't know, I'm just not a proponent, I guess, of that strategy of like, you know, we'll make friends with them and then we'll just trade arms with them, or like, but you know, we'll leverage it at some point. Like, I just feel like although it is much harder to coordinate a global kind of response, I think it's probably a more effective strategy. And also, like, I don't know if I see any evidence like that. Well, I mean, I don't know about the UK so much, but at least in the US, like, we know that there's so many, I mean, arms deals with Saudi Arabia, for example, and it's not like the US is leveraging that and saying, oh, okay, we're gonna like, you know, you can't commit this genocide anymore, or what, like, they're not leveraging that power, is what I'm trying to say. So yeah, like, I'm not sure if from a like in that respect, but I will say in terms of Biden, I mean, I don't know if he's going to be. I mean, Sam was going to touch upon this a little later, I think, or maybe with regards to his first few days in office. But like, I don't know if Biden is going to be someone who is going to. I mean, I think he'll do more than Trump, definitely, but I think that's a pretty low bar as well, in terms of treaties, etc. But yeah, I don't know if he's gonna become like some major peacemaker in the world and stuff. Like, I'm just skeptical, just based on his record, like voting for the Iraq War,
and
for
he's
example.
And Anthony Blinken.
Anthony Blinken, like his Secretary of State, is like a complete war hawk. You know, supported things like the Iraq War and stuff like that. Like, you know, so he hasn't exactly packed, you know, his cabinet, etc. with people who are like really thinking of innovative, you know, international solutions to these problems. He's just doing it with the same old, I guess, military industrial complex links between these people. So yeah, people who essentially are pro-war or like pro-staying in these countries, which essentially benefits these a group of people who, you know, have shares and own kind of companies involved in military production, because obviously the longer you're there, more equipment you'll need, etc. And, you know, more money you'll make. So yeah, I just from that regards, I don't know if Sam has anything else to add.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think what you're saying, Rachel. I mean, one thing is cooperation and trying to foster a dialogue to figure something out. But another thing is just directly supplying them with weapons. I didn't think when it came to like Saudi Arabia, I don't think there wasn't much dialogue going on. I think it was just business. We weren't really forcing them to change anything. But yeah, I do think. I mean, I think that sentiment is correct overall, because I think if you come in approach your country with a you know, aggressive attitude and you know, just just showing that you are the boss here, and like not giving in to any demands that they do, I think it kind of leaves a bad taste in these countries' mouths, and maybe allows them to be like, you know, have more reluctance to work with like the US or the UK, for example. So I do think dialogue is the best thing to do. And also, I think we've seen this, like the damage of sanctions in certain countries. You know, you can look at Iran and the damage is done there when it comes to like medical supplies, for example. Or you can about Cuba, who's been in a sanction for like 60 years. And this, like, you know, this blocks them from basic necessities. And it really affects the people of those nations who, you know, are not involved in foreign policy of those particular countries. So I think my overall thought process is for more cooperation, even when it comes to genocidal regimes, because I think history also shows that a lot of like times when it comes to more violence, it doesn't necessarily result to better things. I mean, obviously you can look at like World War II, for example, but like overall, like the general point is, I think, yeah, it doesn't necessarily lead to a better situation, and often affects the people of those countries worse, you know. So yeah, that's all I have to say about that. And regarding Biden and Trump and all their foreign policy, I think we'll go into a bit more later, and I'll go into a bit more. I think there are countries that will obviously see improvements. Like, for example, how we deal with Iran, for example, will be definitely better than how Trump dealt with them.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, not many other countries, but there are. Yeah, I will go into it a bit more later. Yeah, don't have much else to add to that now.
All right, cool. Rachel, any concluding remarks? Okay, so, well, I guess the next couple of stories, or like 2 stories, are like, about my favorites, the corporations. So, yeah, so basically, I'll start off with the Cineworld one. But yeah, so there was recently reported in the Independent that Cineworld bosses got a £206 million bonus. So surprising. And another article in The Guardian just showed in October that they cut 45,000 jobs. And so, yeah, and also, like, I mean, I will give them credit, isn't like, obviously their finances have been impacted due to coronavirus. They lost £1.2 billion in the first quarter of 2020. But with that being said, in 2019, for example, they made $4 billion in revenues. In 2018, they made another $4 billion in revenues. So it's not like they haven't been making lots of money, over the past couple of years, which could have kind of cushioned them through this time period. But yeah, I mean, just very irresponsible, I feel like, and kind of disgusting behavior, similar to what you saw in 2008 financial crisis, where these big banks were writing massive bonuses for their CEOs, etc. When the whole economy went into a meltdown, and it's just pretty disgusting behavior, I think. And I'll go into the Unilever story now, and then we'll just comment on both of them. But yeah, Unilever also recently insisted that its suppliers should start paying a living wage by 2030. Very, very bold of them. And this is also annoying for a lot of reasons. So I guess the first one is that since 2007, Unilever has made over 39 billion in revenue per year, and in 2019 it made 51 billion in revenue. They didn't release 2020 data, I believe, but regardless, like, tons and tons and tons of money is being made, and obviously their suppliers aren't literally like part of Unilever, like they're separate, but Unilever would definitely have a say in how these suppliers function, obviously because Unilever is a massive conglomerate, and obviously it's probably a big partner of these places, right? So, like, this idea that Unilever is acknowledging, these people working, they're not getting paid enough to live, but you know what, we're only going to solve that by 2030. I find quite a disgusting attitude to have. Just like I feel like there's one thing, like, living in a world where you don't actually realize, that something's going wrong. Like, if Unilever didn't actually know at all that their workers that are work part of their suppliers are not getting paid enough, then that's a separate thing. But acknowledging it and making like a public thing which people know about, and like having an article written about it, and then still insisting on 2030 is just crazy to me.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know what you guys' thoughts on it is.
Yeah, I mean, I'll go into Cineworld story and then Unilever. I think the Cineworld story, it further buries the already discredited idea of trickle-down economics. The idea that basically if you provide like a large sums of bailout money or just money in general to these companies, the companies will you basically use this money to employ more people, to produce more and employ more, and just further improve the economy. But as we've seen in 2008 and now, these bailouts are often used, or mostly used to maximize shareholder profits, also for bonuses, and it really trickles down to creating more jobs and improve and expanding the productive forces of that particular company. So I think, yeah, this is just another case of just the discredited idea of trickle-down economics, and just shows that there needs to be a new way of addressing these crises instead of just relying on giving it to the companies in hope that they actually spend more, employ more, and improve their production forces. But I think, countries have already dealt with this differently. Like, for example, I know Denmark and even France, I think, when they bailed out these companies, they gave ultimatum, basically saying that if we give you this money, you have to employ a certain amount of people. You can't fire a certain amount of people, and this is, you have to abide by that. So I think that's a good way to deal with this issue. But still, it's not a silver bullet, because companies still find ways to skirt these laws. And then regarding Unilever, I think it's interesting because, I mean, firstly, I can say that 2030 is still a long time to have a living wage, and what I'm wondering is how is the living wage defined? Is it the living wage is it like a universal living wage that like the World Bank sets, or is it the living wage of the particular country of the supplier? I'm wondering how it's set, because a lot of the time, like, World Bank is notorious for deflating poverty by like lowering like the poverty wages so much, like, to give a false image. So I'm wondering how they define living wage. And also, I think a lot of companies historically they come up with a lot of big promises. I remember Virgin, they had big promises, like they would go all green by that particular date. But when push comes to shove, and there's an economic crisis or there's a lack of profit, then the first thing they're gonna target is workers' wages, and also like the more like outlier parts of their business, like green production. So those are usually the first things on the chopping block. So I'm very skeptical that this will happen by 2030. I think a lot of it is a marketing campaign. And I think our current economic system kind of depends on people not being paid a living wage, because at the end of the day, it is, this economic system is about maximizing profits, and it always, has been. So I'm very doubtful that they're gonna suddenly pay these workers the lowest of the low, the workers in the global South countries. I doubt they're gonna be getting a living wage. But I mean, if it does happen in 2030, hats off to them. But yeah, I'm just skeptical.
Just one thing before I go to you, Rachel. Like, I also just want to say, these companies are also, they really kind of hit you with that propaganda. Like, I remember so when I was applying to do some basically like jobs from like a placement year, Unilever is obviously a massive company, so they had like a bunch of positions. So I was like applying, and they walk you through all these these kind of scenarios, right? And you have to give your opinions on like whatever they kind of show you, right? And so the Unilever one, like, they really try to emphasize things like how well they treat their employees, like how amazing we are, with regards to like how green technology, how much we're emphasizing it, all this stuff, right? And then you actually just do like a couple minutes of research, for example, and you see, I believe I think Unilever was the most polluting, or maybe it was Coca-Cola, but they're like the top 10 most polluting like corporations in the world. Like Unilever as well, as we're discussing here, like in terms of working conditions and stuff. Like, it's really kind of maybe like really this idea of kind of the middle earners essentially making like enough money where like they can live a decent life, like an office employee, for example. They can live like they're fine, they're not like struggling, for example, but maybe they're not getting paid enough, but then they feel like you don't want to be pushing for it in case you get knocked down in a salary. Do you understand what I mean? Like, there's a dynamics at play there.
I mean, they mostly just, how they escape criticism is they outsource a lot of these jobs within the lower down in the supply chain. So they can say like, oh, look, because they can have mostly highly skilled jobs that pay decently. So look, we treat our employees so well, but the companies that we subcontract to produce our items are not paying our employees so well, So, I mean, yeah, they kind of skirt that responsibility, but
yeah. Anyway, Rachel, off to you.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I think you've both kind of summed up really well what I would say. Obviously, there does need to be some account taken for the fact that they will have lost a lot in earnings over the pandemic, like Cineworld especially, has kind of been in the news a lot in terms of just that customer base not being there and not allowed to be there due to lockdowns and things. But yeah, there's just this continuous theme of a disparity between the leadership and those kind of senior echelons and their workers. Like 2030, they're seeing as a really kind of near target. But for people who are actually receiving these wages right now, that's like a very long 9 years wait.
Yeah.
So yeah, again, it just kind of highlights how a lot of these executives are very out of touch, and I think that's a very prevalent theme. But yeah, I think mainly really you two summed up my thoughts on those two pretty well.
Also, I'll just say one more thing before we get to these Russia reports. But like, I feel like a lot of the kind of when you have this discussion with people, some of the responses you hear back is like, oh, but these CEOs, they work so hard, like they deserve this money, all that stuff, right? And if you didn't actually look, if you didn't look, I guess, too deep into it, maybe you'd be like, okay, yeah, I mean, I guess maybe it's fair enough. I mean, like, I don't believe that, but yeah, let's just accept that as true. But in a year like with coronavirus, right, where literally everyone has been staying at home, the CEO has not been doing like 200, like has not been doing that much more work than his average worker, right? Like the idea that he can get paid 206 million in bonuses, like what? It's just completely just untrue, and like and it's like really, I feel like it's really stark when you see this in a year where no one's really been working or because they couldn't, right? So yeah, just and just in general, this kind of talks to a greater trend which we've seen, which is the idea of the ratio that your CEO earns compared to like your average worker's salary just has been increasing and increasing and increasing over the past decades. And this is just another example of that. And yeah, so that's my final remarks on it.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I mean, like, the example of worker co-ops is a pushback to the idea that, the CEO is like the main person who does the main work, because there are companies who are democratic and are run by workers and they function really well. And in the case of Mondragon, which is a company in Spain, they're one of the biggest companies in Spain, and it's a democratically run company. So yeah, I mean, just to dismiss that rationale, but yeah, it is a big problem because we've seen throughout this year with coronavirus how so many people have lost wealth and savings, while the richest people in the world have massively gained money, gained on their worth. So yeah, that's really all.
Also, with the country you mentioned over there, it's they cap the the CEO or the boss of the business can only make 6 times more, I think, than
in the Mondragon, it's the it's like the managers.
Management, yeah, can only make 6 times more than the worker.
Yeah.
But yeah, anyway, Rachel, take it away.
Yeah. Okay, so going on to the Russia protests. Last Saturday, the 23rd, tens of thousands of people took to the streets in more than 100 cities across the country as part of the biggest example of opposition we've seen in recent years, probably since 2011, if not larger than then. This quickly led to the arrests of thousands of people, including Alexei Navalny's wife. On Monday, following these protests, Vladimir Putin insisted that an extravagant palace on the Black Sea was not his. This was ahead of a lot of claims from Navalny and his followers that this huge palace belonged to the president, and it's really just synonymous of this kind of wave of corruption claims that the opposition leader is heralding against the Russian government. We saw a lot of the protests over the weekend, people carrying toilet brushes as a reflection of the corruption that we're seeing. This was off one of Navalny's blog posts, that the Russian toilets within Putin's palaces cost like in excess of kind of 2-3 times more than the average Russian's home. And the kind of cleaning bills and the gold that was on this is just awful. So that was quite an interesting and quite a modern kind of phenomenon, really, and again is highlighting how there's just this distrust now with Putin and the administration. There's also undoubtedly been a shift in the policy of the Russian government. Their preferred position has previously been to simply ignore critics, most vocally that of Navalny, simply by kind of shrugging away the impact and the reach of these, and they've been keen to avoid adding any legitimacy to the claims. I think they're seeing if they give them airtime and they give them oxygen, then they're only going to grow. But if they kind of shrug them off as small blogs, something really relevant that they're not even going to waste their time talking about, then it will hopefully go away. Well, that policy has failed, and they've now had to adopt a new policy of instead highlighting the fact that these protests are illegal, that they're dangerous, denouncing the opposition, denouncing claims of the Novichok poisoning, which saw Navalny treated in a coma in Germany for many months, and not only kind of seeing it as a small blog channel, but clearly as a very critical threat to the regime. Now, whether anyone actually thinks there's going to be a kind of serious change in the administration anytime soon, that we'll see the removal of Putin, is another thing. But if you ask the people on the streets, who were very aware that arrests would undoubtedly follow as a result of those kind of acts, if they think that it's time for a change in Russia, then 100% they're saying yes. So some pretty big scenes over this last weekend, and I think many more to come, really.
Yeah, I think regarding this whole situation with Navalny, I think it's like my stance on it is to be carefully supportive, because on one hand, I think it's good that Navalny is calling out the lack of democracy, freedom of speech, and right to protest in Russia, and I think that's good, because post-Soviet, there's been no, I mean, even during Soviet, there was really a lack of freedom of expression and, of speech. And him calling this out is good. So I support him on that front. And the fact that there's so many protests, like nationwide protests in Russia, is a very big deal. And I do support that. But on the other hand, Navalny's political beliefs are a bit problematic in the sense that he is quite far right. He's very nationalistic, and he has ties to certain neo-Nazi groups, at least historically. So I wouldn't say he's ideologically speaking, you don't want to be associated with him in that sense. But I do think you have to give support to his criticisms of corruption and lack of democracy in the country. So yeah, I think you have to be cautiously support his what he's doing there. And what would help is actually if other parties within Russia get involved. So it's not only his set of ideology that is supporting more freedom. So I know, like, for example, like the second biggest party in Russia is like the Communist Party. So I do think, like, if we can get cross-party support on issues around democracy and freedom of speech, and I think that only improved the movement more. But yeah, I mean, so just cautious. Make sure to support him on the right things, but also there should be challenges, around his nationalistic beliefs. But I think, yeah, overall it is a good thing that the people are rising up and there is more protests to be done. So I think, yeah, it's interesting. So it's good. It's good.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I take the same stance as Samuel, to be honest, just based on principle. I mean, to be honest, I'm a big fan of Russian history, but Russian politics as of right now, to say I'm the most informed in it would probably be a bit of a lie, to be honest. But yeah, like in general though, yeah, I support it. Obviously be a bit cautious. And generally, like I would say though, for what I do know, I don't think that Putin will be removed anytime soon. Yeah. I'm quite doubtful of that, to be honest. Just because he has quite a stranglehold there, doesn't he? So I'm a bit doubtful of it. But like again, freedom of protest definitely good. Freedom of speech definitely something I support. So all power to them. But yeah, again, just more nuance and not so like blindly. Not so much blind support, I guess, is my message. Just more generally. But yeah, it applies here as well.
Yeah, no, I agree, especially like in terms of that he's by no means this kind of clean like poster boy of liberal democracies that he's trying to like implement here. Is it just kind of like a similar least worst case scenario?
Yeah.
But yeah, I think certainly I would agree with you both there.
Yeah, I mean, because they already got like a far-rightish nationalistic person in charge already, so might as well have a democratic one.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah.
Should we do Twitter Birdwatch?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know who wants to introduce this because, I mean, I just saw this. I mean, I don't know if Rachel you want to or Sam you want to, but just from what I've seen, it's just a new form of like community. I don't say policing because that seems a bit intense, but effectively, like you can flag up, oh, this is a misleading post or whatever, and then link an article or whatever. I don't know if I'm missing anything there.
Yeah,
Is there-
it's like I think it's like a community fact checking feature within the website. I think I don't know how they're gonna handle this because like Twitter is the biggest wasteland in the world. Like there's so many crazy like tweets and like people on Twitter. I don't know how they're gonna handle that. But I just don't like. I think as you've said with censorship in the past, I think it can be a slippery slope because we're talking about how we were happy that Twitter was banning Trump and people who were like plotting like far right people who were plotting, like insurrection, but that does lead to the possibility of if there is critique of the government on serious issues, whether from the left or the right, then there is a possibility of like flagging like these things as fake, even if they're not necessarily fake, just because they're critical. So it depends on how it's used. If it is a community based, I don't know if it's just any random person can just like flag a comment, or if it's like certain establishments within Twitter that can flag it. Because if it is given to like a few people, who wield power, it can lead to bad consequences. So yeah, I mean, I just don't know the success of these fact-checking features on social media. Like, I think on Facebook it's hardly done anything because the people who look at more conspiratorial stories, they're not going to believe when Facebook puts something, this is fake news. Like, they don't believe it. So I just don't know how effective it is.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's certainly a step in the right direction. But when I was looking into it, like it wasn't the most super clear thing. I suppose Twitter, like all social media apps, have really kind of grappled with the spread of misinformation and things. But yeah, this fact checking thing, I saw like users are able to add notes below tweets in order to provide greater context. Is that context like facts and statistics and figures? Is it kind of like linking to more well-respected articles? I'm not too sure how it will work in practice, but I think, it's almost like a bit of a kind of show exercise as well, that these huge corporations do need to be seen at least to be combating kind of information, especially after the Capitol riots and kind of like inciting violence and things there. But yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there, Samuel, in terms of if people are in these like places looking at these conspiracy theories, then if a little ad pops up to say like find out more about what's actually going on, or here's like Birdwatch's opinion, then I just don't think that they're gonna kind of read that and think, oh gosh, I've been completely misled here,
Yeah, exactly.
I can just imagine the notes on Twitter. It's like
it'd be
like,
so trolling. I think.
I don't know if they're self-aware of how discourse goes down on Twitter, but I can just imagine the notes being like the most stupidest things ever. It's like, I don't know how it's gonna work.
No, no, I so agree. Like, I take probably a bit more of a cynical approach to this, in saying that I think that this is kind of an attempt of Twitter to, let's just say, shift the blame kind of onto more like the individual members of the community. Like, oh, all this fake news is spreading, but it's not our fault that we didn't flag it up or whatever. We gave it to the community so that they can flag it up, and I think that could be a little bit of that at play. But I think on like a more lighter note, though, I think this is actually an hilarious feature because, as Samuel said, like the context that imagine going to a QAnon page and seeing like the notes added onto that. Like that would be genuinely hilarious and also very worrisome. But to Twitter's credit, I mean, to be fair, I don't give a lot of these social media giants credit too often because, they're monopolies. But I will say this: they have definitely it's the banning of Trump did come with a reduction in the amount of misinformation being spread around. I saw. So Twitter said that they released this. I don't know if they released a statement or just, I mean, made it aware that the fact that that did lead to reduction in misinformation, which is great. So I mean, I guess that kind of shows there is something to be said for fact checking, right? Or deplatforming. Oh, I hate the word deplatforming as well, but in some way, like, yeah, I mean, Trump was a really big mouthpiece for the far right? So yeah, so I guess there's a aspect of that, but yeah, I just think in general a funny feature that's probably going to come to bite Twitter and Twitter in the butt eventually.
Yeah, no, yeah, I agree. Yeah, not much else to add to that.
I mean, I'm just thinking as well, like in the context of, imagine, like, because the whole something that I've spoken to Samuel about, I'm sure I've spoken on the podcast about, is this idea that Twitter could in the past like define what news sources they were like, oh, this news source is like legit, right? And that's obviously open to like there can be biases in that approach, right? I'm not trying to say that Twitter has a left or right bias, but I'm just saying a lot of these, if you actually look at some of the reporting which is done from some of these sources, it's obviously it can be flawed at sometimes. Like one time where that was really prominent was with the Bolivian elections, where they're trying to claim flat out that it was that this was a coup attempt and all that kind of, sorry, not a coup attempt, but that the election result was fraud and stuff. And the reality was that it actually it wasn't, and after investigations it wasn't. Yet these places did report that it was. So it's there's also an aspect of that to it, which I just thought it's probably good to raise. That even places which Twitter does deem to be good can also do have certain biases based on funding, maybe, of who owns the places, etc. So yeah, that's also just a disclaimer when you're engaging in these discussions, I feel like.
Yeah, I mean, like, I wonder, like, in leading up to the Iraq War, would Twitter have censored or claimed false news on like the big media sources when they said Saddam Hussein has weapons of mass destruction, like, which is obviously fake, and the mainstream media just went along with it and reported it as such. So yeah, there definitely needs to be something to be said about that. That just because you're reputable and a big media source doesn't mean you necessarily the truth teller, that you claim you are. But yeah,
should we do a brief Uganda election update as well?
Yeah, if Rachel's done with, yeah. Okay, yeah. So just a quick update about the Uganda elections that we talked about last week. So after 11 days in house arrest, the Ugandan High Court ordered security to end Wine's house arrest and claimed that the government, if they have evidence of wrongdoing against Bobby Wine, then they should take it up in the court instead of unjustifiably holding him up at house arrest. So I think that is obviously positive news, but it seems that they haven't actually left Bobby Wine's house and they're still staying there. So he recently tweeted on Twitter, he said, "The High Court ruled this morning that my continued house arrest, 11 days now, is illegal and unconstitutional. Several hours later, the military still surrounds my home, blocking access to all, perhaps, as always, waiting for Gen Museveni's orders on the next course of action." So, so it shows that despite the order from the High Court, there still hasn't been much action done. And on the side of Bobby Wine, like, they're still deciding whether they're gonna appeal the results of the elections to court, but they can't really come together as a team to discuss because they're on house arrest. So it's very limited to who you can talk to. So that's just the recent update. So unfortunately, I mean, it doesn't seem like much changed, even though the High Court declared it unjustifiable. So I have to just monitor the situation in the next few weeks to see if anything changes, and hopefully, if there's justice, that he successfully appeals these results, and hopefully he wins. But that's very wishful thinking, I think, in Uganda right now.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't have anything else to add to this, but yeah, it just sucks that my man is under house arrest still, and hopefully they leave and he can just organize, appeal the results, and take the dub.
Yeah, Yeah, for sure. Like, especially, the house arrest in terms of like even basic supplies and things have been cut off to him, like military helicopters circling above the complex.
Crazy. Yeah.
Like, it is just absolutely crazy. But yeah, just to kind of agree that I hope some solution is reached, and it's a fair one, whatever that solution is for wine.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so his last topic, the
Last
US.
topic, yes.
So yes, quite a lot has happened since we covered the US. So yeah, I mean, while I quickly wanted to talk about Mike Pompeo's foreign policy actions, that he sneaked in there just before Biden became president, because I think a lot of it does determine the future of foreign policy in the next 4 years, but even beyond that, with the superpowers of the world, and also the countries that are used as proxy in that bigger war, I think. So I wanted to talk about a few actions. Start off with Iran. I think. Oh, this issue affects Yemen and Iran. So Mike Pompeo declared the Yemen Houthis as a terrorist group. So the Yemen Houthis, they within Syria, and they have, I think they're in charge of the capital right now, and declaring the Yemeni Houthis as a terrorist group, it affects Yemen in a few ways. For example, with humanitarian aid, declaring them as a terrorist group it limits the amount of humanitarian aid that the country is highly dependent on. It limits their access to that. So this could further the humanitarian crisis within Yemen, and also gives the upper hand to Saudi Arabia in this fight. So it is not good. And the reason why this affects Iran is also because they have been supporting the Yemeni Houthis, and yeah, it's just a further aggression towards them, as they've done throughout the whole 4 years in office, Trump. So it is a big issue. Furthermore, they also Mike Pompeo claimed that Iran has al-qaeda operatives within the country, and they forming like a group there and training, which is obviously there's not much basis to that claim. In fact, the Saudi Arabia, which is our ally, they're known to be the biggest source of terrorism, the biggest supporter of terrorism worldwide, not Iran. So I think Iran is, in a sense, it's used as the proxy between the US's fight between, I think, Russia and China, because they have more established relationship with Russia and China, and just to counter that, US is showing more and more aggression towards Iran. So it is a complicated thing. Luckily, Biden, he really wants to uphold the legacy that Obama left, in the sense of forming and agreeing on the Iran deal. So he's looking to rearrange an agreement with Iran, which is arguably probably the best thing that Obama did during his presidency, because it did work. It did prevent Iran from building nuclear weapons, and at minimal cost for the US. So it was a very good deal that Obama did. So hopefully they can find an agreement and kind of reverse Pompeo and Trump's aggression towards Iran. And hopefully, regarding the whole Yemen conflict, I don't think it goes enough because I forgot to add that Biden also, he did reverse some of the sanctions already on Yemeni Houthis. So that's a positive first step. But I think he needs to go further and completely, dissociate himself from Saudi Arabia, stop giving them arms to fight this war, so that this humanitarian crisis can finally stop once and for all, because it's criminal what's going on there, and the fact that we've supported them for years is a disgrace. And then the next country I want to go into is Cuba, which is crazy because Mike Pompeo reassigned them a state sponsor of terrorism, which is, I'll tell you the history about this, because they first got into the state sponsor of terrorism in 1982 with Ronald Reagan, and that was, from then it was a very baseless claim of being involved in terrorism. It was more just an anti-communist tactic that he used to villainize Cuba and its leaders there, and just as part of an overall campaign of crushing any communist countries. So there's no basis for that to being part of that list, However, in 2014, Obama, he took them off the state-sponsored list of terrorism after like long, a lot of research and background checks. And, he did realize that it was not a lot of basis to that claim. So they took them off that list. But now, right before they left, Pompeo decided to add them on the state list of terrorism. And as I said, there isn't much basis to this claim, but what they claim is their reason is the connection to the Colombian guerrilla leaders of the International Liberation Movement. But however, they're actually not, they're not supporting any of these guerrilla leaders. In fact, they're part of an international accord for peace negotiations between Colombian government and these guerrilla leaders, and they facilitate this along with Norway. So they're not the only country that's facilitating these negotiations. They're also with Norway, and it just it's this thing that's already understood, and I think the U.S. secretly knows that this is the case. They're not sanctioning Norway for supporting these. It's an international treaty peace negotiation. So it's just another way to appease their Florida base of Latino Cuban Americans. And it just at the end of the day, it's based on this this old Cold War mentality of just shaming any communist state and just placing sanctions on them. So at the end of the day, this furthers the suffering of the Cuban people who've been under a blockade for 60 years now. So, and it hasn't worked, because they've always found ways to escape these crushing sanctions, and it's just unsuccessful. And hopefully Biden backtracks this and follows in the footsteps of Obama of taking them off the list of terrorism, but also going further than that, and actually normalizing diplomacy and taking the blockade off of them as a country, because I mean, to be generous and to say that there's so much more worse people, so much worse country, in the world than Cuba, that we actively support. And I can go, in my opinion, I think they actually, in a lot of ways, they are force for good in the world, because they've shown countless humanitarian deeds, helping out countries that are even supposed enemy. When there was the Hurricane Katrina in America, Cuba offered doctors to go help in that situation, but America rejected because of political reasons. And throughout this whole coronavirus pandemic, or the Ebola pandemic, they've taken doctors to help these countries. And actually, it's called the Henry Reeves Brigade, who go around the world to help these countries, and they've actually been nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. So I think there's a lot of hysteria around Cuba, and a lot of propaganda around what they actually stand for and how they function as a country. So just hopefully they go further and end the blockade, but that's really wishful thinking. I'm even hesitant that he'll take them off the state sponsor of terrorism list, because he performed very poorly with Floridian voters, and perhaps to appease them, he might not even consider doing that and maintaining this. But yeah, it's just a failed policy of the past that hasn't worked, and this damages the citizens within the country.
I will also say, Biden, I think, also comes from the school of a more Cold War era school of thought, to be honest, where taking a country like Cuba off the blockade would just be really contradictory to his fundamental values. Before we get on to Biden, do you have anything else to add with Cuba?
Cuba, no. I just think it's a sad thing. They still continue this policy of kind of starving the country into revolt or into destabilization. It's not gonna. It might work in some countries, but in Cuba it hasn't worked. You've forced a lot of suffering on that region, and it's still nothing significant has changed within the country. So yeah, just a failed policy.
Yeah, I'll just say quickly before I pass on to Rachel. The idea that the U.S., for example, can so easily just dictate, which countries are run by terrorists, or I was just saying the state sponsors terrorist lists. The U.S. themselves are one of the biggest terrorist organizations in the world. Just throughout history, you see them sponsoring coups, etc. in the whole of South America, Nicaragua, Chile, Argentina. Cuba. Cuba, they did a whole terrorist regime of like bombing factories, etc. They tried to assassinate Castro hundreds and hundreds of times, and that failed. Then that's just in that side of the world. Plus, I'm even missing out on more, which were sections which are involved in Operation Condor, I believe. And then we get to the Middle East, where that's a whole separate thing. And even in Africa, there's so many proxy wars fought in Africa. Angola, I believe, was a big one as well. Like this idea that, this idea that the U.S. is some great force for good, or like has any moral high ground, is so discredited, or should be so discredited, to be honest, because they've genuinely caused so much harm to so many regions for economic benefit in large part. That's just what I'll say with that. And with regards to Cuba, obviously solidarity to Cuban comrades over there, because they've been under attack for a really long time. That's just what I'll say on that.
Yeah, I agree with what both of you have said. I think Cuba certainly has some shortcomings, and a lot have critiqued whether they were like entirely selfless kind of policies with Hurricane Katrina and things. I think maybe they were a lot more selfless than other countries would have been, but like obviously there's still like kind of aspect of critique there. But yeah, I think in terms of the proxy wars and things that we've seen just time and time again over the years, I would agree with what you're both kind of drawing attention to there.
Yeah. What I say about, that's one quick thing before we move on to, I want to talk about China and that whole issue around US and China. But regarding Cuba and the doctors, obviously you can say that. Maybe there's other motives to it, but there's a lot of false information about the fact that they're like slave laborers, which is like, and they're coerced into doing these jobs. But this is very it's no base to this claim, because first of all, Cuba pay their doctors to go, and the countries that host Cuban doctors also pay them. So at the end of the day, by the time they return to Cuba, they earn much more money than the Cubans that have stayed at home have earned. So it's not much basis in that claim. But obviously no country is only selfless. I'm sure that is one way to make some money. No much else to say. I think, and it is true you said that like Cuba is not perfect, but I do think there has to be a sense of realism when you come to a country that has faced a lot of aggression throughout the years. Like I don't think you can expect them to be perfect. And like how these countries still have millions spent on destabilizing them on the ground. So I don't think you can expect them to act perfect all the time. Obviously, no one's above critique. But yeah, it is a complicated process. But I'm just saying overall, the overall process of cutting them off economically, labeling them as a terrorist or state, like it does no one good, I think.
Also, the U.S. has been involved with Cuba for so long. I'm surprised they're not tired of it by now. Like they're propping up Batista before the revolution even started, right? They're involved in 1898, I think, when with the end of Spanish-Cuban War, I believe, the U.S. was already involved in with regards to that. So they've been in Cuba and have had interest in Cuba for a really long time. So yeah. Anyway, just also as Sam was saying in terms of aggression, Cuba has faced tons and tons of aggression. Like I feel like one of the a big I don't want to get into this too much, but like something like the Cuban Missile Crisis, for example, like this idea that it was Cuba being completely aggressive and stuff is really kind of false. Like the U.S. put missile bases in Turkey, and then Cuba therefore then retaliated, etc. So yeah. Anyway, they have been they've had like a lot of aggression aimed towards them. But yeah. Anyway, we can move on from this.
Lastly, I wanted to discuss like the increased aggression, I think, towards China as well. This particularly comes in the form of ending limits on U.S. diplomatic contacts with Taiwan. And I think there is an argument to be made that China's policies towards different regions like Taiwan, Tibet, Hong Kong, for example, like there's room for criticism, but I don't think we are implementing these policies surrounding human rights. It is, at the end of the day, it is it's at the end of the day, it's same with Soviet Union, for example. It's right now I think there's a fight for power, because I think, the West and especially the US notices that China, if they continue how they're doing, they eventually will eclipse the US as the most powerful country in the world. So I think they're thinking about how they can, stop China. And I think this like they can either take two routes, you can either find a cooperation with China, which I think they're willing to do with most countries, or, increase aggression and try to topple them and their influence. So yeah, I think this is just another move towards that. But I think we've seen this adoption of a new Cold War mentality, because there has, the US has increased their presence near Chinese borders. They have upgraded their military. And this has forced China to retaliate and also improve their military and add new nuclear technology to their military. So it seems like there is a further escalation between the US and China. So yeah, I think it's going to be interesting, like how Biden approaches this. Will he take on the form of cooperation, or will he be more aggressive? I think that I'm leaning more towards the latter. I don't think. Maybe he won't be as aggressive as Trump was, but I think they will find ways to counter Chinese influence when it comes to the Belt and Road Initiative. Because the China is gaining a lot of, they're making a lot of alliances in key strategic areas, especially when it comes to resources, natural resources. Like they created a lot of partnerships with Africa in the Belt and Road Initiative. They have different ties to different countries in South America, which is also natural resource heavy. So, especially now, I think you can kind of link it to with the more transition to a green economy. Like these countries have a lot of resources, so there's going to be a big fight for those resources, and who's going to have a stranglehold on those countries, So, yeah, I don't think there's going to be cooperation, really from Biden, but yeah, it's just interesting to see how you can sense a slow escalation, And yeah, I'm just wondering on how it's gonna work, because obviously we have to criticize China on their human rights abuses when it comes to the repression and oppression of the Uyghurs, for example, and everything surrounding that. You have to be critical and be critical, but you can't that doesn't mean to amount to a new Cold War mentality where it puts the whole globe at risk, So I hope there's some cooperation around China and the US and the West in general. But yeah, I thought it was just an interesting move from Pompeo. And I just wonder how Biden's going to counter this.
Yeah. No, yeah. I think it'll definitely be interesting. I feel like Pompeo had as I guess we've outlined there, with some regions he has really escalated, this escalated tensions and things. So it'll be interesting to see what Biden does. Yeah, I don't know, not much to add to that, to be honest.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I think it will also be interesting in terms of the Hong Kong kind of umbrella democracy protests, how Biden kind of deals with them, because it's maybe more of a softer play than some of the economic sanctions, although politics is obviously huge in the arena. I think it kind of suits his brand image of this bastion of kind of liberal democracy, whether rightly or wrongly. But I think that may be one area that they make some comments about. But yeah, no, I agree overall.
Yeah. Are we gonna get into executive orders?
Oh, yeah. That's Now that Biden's
Wait, Rachel, do you have anything to say there?
I've just got my call at past. But,
yes. How could we forget? Oh yes, sorry. I didn't realize this podcast has gone on for so long. We'll have to save the executive orders for a different time.
Yeah.
That's okay. Or you two can carry on, but I don't know if that disrupts.
No. It's fine. We can end it here. To be fair,
I'm sure the more developments will be done anyway with Biden. I think he's been signing executive orders, and on the key issues, for the past few days. So I think it's going to continue for the next few days. So we can cover it later on in the week. I think.
Yeah, exactly. No worries at all. So yeah, anyway, I guess that's Systems Reimagined, episode 6 or 5? No, 5. Subscribe, like, comment if you obviously enjoyed the content and things like that. If you want to see this hairstyle as well, a bit crazy, so stay around for that. But anyway, thank you, Rachel Samuel, for the
and
for
make
everything.
sure to follow us on Instagram which is at Systems Reimagined, and Twitter at Sys Reimagined. So SYS Reimagined.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Exactly. Thank you all. See you soon.
Bye.
Bye.